4, Section 2. And the big idea, once more, is that the Constitution of the United States establishes and protects fundamental rights and liberties. Fundamental as in this is the basics. It doesn't go into the details, but the details are in the interpretation. Terms you'll see, like search warrant, indictment, grand jury, double jeopardy, etc. Proportion is kind of a key term here because, while we're talking about the Bill of Rights, these 10 laws that apply to a nation of over 300 million people, the law has to take individuals into effect in terms of how it's administered. And that's why, criminal justice involves proportional interpretation, meaning for the individual. And so, as we get into criminal law a little bit, we'll also be thinking about what does it mean to be accused of a serious crime and what are your rights if you find yourself in serious trouble. And so, in our first part of the Bill of Rights, I want to think about the rights of the accused. In addition to your civil liberties, your rights to expression, the other 9 amendments go into your rights to fair and legal treatment. Fair and legal treatment. And so several of these amendments guarantee fair treatment for people who are suspected or accused of committing a crime. And this is really important that you understand. I just want to give a caveat. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving legal advice. We're just talking about these things generally. So, first off is the Fourth Amendment. There are no unreasonable searches and seizures. No unreasonable searches and seizures. That means that if you are walking down the street carrying visible drug paraphernalia, you're carrying a bong in your hand for everyone to see, an officer has every right to search your person. He's going to confiscate your bong, he's going to pat you down, he or she, and they have obvious and visible grounds to arrest you. But there's a difference between if you are doing something visibly illegal and if you're just walking down the street. Now, an officer can stop you if they have probable reason. They can ask to search your vehicle, but again, demanding is different. There has to be a reason, and the reason may require a search warrant. A search warrant is a court order that allows law enforcement officers to search a suspect's home or business and take specific items as evidence. And there's a due process here that officers are required by the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution to follow. And all that is so that your rights may be protected. And that's to keep someone from storming into your house, searching your things without your permission, because it's your right to privacy. The Fifth Amendment. This is also to protect you if you are accused of a crime. If you're going to be put on trial for a serious crime, there has to be an indictment. That is a formal charge. Now, I'm not talking about a speeding ticket here. If you choose to contest a speeding ticket, which you have every right to do, you go before the judge of that county. The officer accusing you of speeding will also be present because you have the constitutional right to face your accuser. I'm talking about the big stuff. You've been involved in a hit and run that resulted in a fatality. You killed someone with your vehicle and you fled the scene. That is a serious charge. That if you are captured by the police, you would go through an indictment. That is a formal accusation of the crime. And this would be heard by a grand jury. A grand jury is a group of citizens that decide whether or not there is sufficient evidence to even accuse someone of a crime. So, for example, driving down the road, and I witness Alyssa as a new driver just plow over an old lady. I mean, it was ugly. She's paced on the road. And, well, I observed this. I'm driving. I didn't exactly have my phone out filming or anything, but I observed this. I saw it happen. She stopped. I stopped. She looked around. I looked around. We're the only two people on the road. And she gunned it and left. She just committed a felony. And whether it was an accident or not is irrelevant at this point. She just hit and run, a vehicular homicide, felony charges. Now, I, as a responsible citizen, I'm freaked out, but the first thing I do is dial 911. Somebody just plowed over an old lady on 26. And whether or not old lady should have been on 26 or not is irrelevant. It's a hit and run, vehicular homicide. And they're going to say, well, okay, and then they're going to get some descriptions. A detective's going to call me very quickly to figure out how can we find this person. And whether or not I took a picture of their license plate or had any evidence is irrelevant. There's a body. There's not a perpetrator. We got to find them. Now, the officers find Alyssa. Don't know how, we just did. And now there needs to be an indictment. And a jury is going to be presiding over this case. She still has rights. Doesn't matter whether she killed an old lady with her car or not. She has rights. And I know that's an extreme case. But you also have the right to not be tried for the same crime twice, and that's double jeopardy. Double jeopardy is part of the Fifth Amendment, and that protects someone from being accused of a crime for which you have already been acquitted. So let's carry out the analogy. Alyssa's been arrested. The only evidence against her, somehow there's no old lady parts in her car. There's just no evidence whatsoever, no DNA evidence that her car touched an old lady. The only evidence is my word versus her word. She claims innocence. She wasn't even on 26 that day. She was over in Bryson City riding the Smoky Mountains train. Okay, great. So she's riding the Smoky Mountains train. There's no evidence of this, but whatever. It's my word versus hers. And that's called circumstantial evidence. It doesn't work in a court of law. She's free to go. Alyssa keeps driving her car. Whether she did a good job cleaning up old lady parts, that's irrelevant. Because the point is, she's been tried, she's been acquitted, she can never be tried for that case again. She's free to go.
What happens if you find more evidence?
And then finally, you cannot be forced, this is the one everybody knows about the Fifth Amendment, you can't be forced to testify against yourself. When you've been Mirandized, meaning that if you go under arrest, first thing the officer has to say to you is they have to read you your rights. And the first thing they say, obviously, is the right to remain silent. And you do. You could remain silent and not say a single word, and you could serve your prison sentence and never say a word to anybody. And you have that right. You cannot be compelled to provide evidence against yourself. Process. Due process is established legal procedures. There's a certain way that things have to be done because we want to make sure that your rights are being protected. It also, the Fifth Amendment limits the government's power. And that's what the Bill of Rights are all about. These are limits to the government's power over you, particularly eminent domain. You see, your property is your property. It's your right to do what you will with it. That's my bike outside there. If I wanted to set it on fire, that's my right to do that. As long as I'm not hurting anyone else with my property, do what I want to with it. If I want to throw it off a building, it's my property. It's mine. and the government does not have the right to seize it, not without probable cause. Now, if I hit an old lady with my bicycle, okay, that's probable cause, but it still has to be heard
You just like
by a judge.
and smack her.
Just, yeah, I mean, lots of fictional old ladies will be used
Level
in this
that old lady
course.
with your bike.
Yeah, so again, if my bike were used to commit a crime, then a warrant would have to be given for that, if that property is to be seized. Okay, Sixth Amendment. The Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution requires the accused to be told exactly the nature of the charges. And there's a really neat movie that goes along with the Sixth Amendment. I don't know if you've ever heard of Franz Kafka's The Trial. It's a short story written by Franz Kafka. It's fascinating. And it's about a young man who is accused of a crime, sentenced to prison, and served without ever knowing what the heck he was accused of. And if we have time at the end of class, I'll start it. It's on YouTube. We can watch it in pieces. It's really good. It's kind of dry. It's an older short story turned into a modern movie, but I think you'll like it. But anyway, the whole point of the movie is that this poor man, Joseph K., was accused of a crime, was sentenced, was put in prison, and later executed without ever knowing what the heck was going on. And the Sixth Amendment was created to prevent that sort of thing. It also protects your right to a trial by jury. That if you are accused of a crime, you have a right to be heard by a jury of your peers. And you have a right to filter out who those peers are. Because, if Lauren's mad at me for something, it's probably not best for her to be on my jury if I'm in trouble. And it also guarantees the right to a speedy and public trial. Because another one of the poor problems that happens to Joseph K. is that he's held in custody awaiting trial for an indeterminate amount of time. I mean, he'd been in custody for over a year before the trial even started. And then finally, a public trial. If you're a Harry Potter fan, you may remember when poor Harry Potter was accused of a crime and it was a private trial. I mean, no one was allowed to hear his case, and that's a problem. The Sixth Amendment is all about due process as well. You have the right to tell your side of the story, your constitutional right. You also have the right to face your accuser. If someone is going to testify against you in a court of law, you have the right to hear and cross-examine them. So if I'm going to claim that Alyssa ran over an old lady on 26, then I have to appear in court and testify against her. And her or her lawyer probably would have the right to cross-examine me and go, and question the validity of my point. And you also have the right to a defense by an attorney. Now, when this was written in 1787, that did not include a publicly funded defender. That came later as a result of an interpretation by the U.S. Supreme Court of that defense by a lawyer. Because what happens if you can't afford a lawyer? Well, the law is complicated. I expect to just know how all of this operates. The Eighth Amendment forbids excessive bail. Bail is a sum of money used as security because, you see, we don't normally hold you in custody unless we consider you a flight risk or a danger to public safety. So if Alyssa has been accused of running over said old lady, unless the court felt that she's going to go out and run over more old ladies, they're going to set a bail. And the Eighth Amendment protects her from excessive bail. We're not just going to set bail at $10 gajillion, boom, and then she has to go get a loan for $10 gajillion. No, it's going to be set at a reasonable level. The purpose of bail it's a sum of money, a security. Like, she's going to show up in court or she'll be paying $100,000. So she's going to show up in court. She doesn't have $100,000. But when she shows up in court, she gets that $100,000 back. So that's what bail does. Okay. It also forbids excessive fines. You know, sometime in your life, you're likely to get a speeding ticket. It's just odds are at some point you will get a traffic violation, especially as a young driver. It just happened, not the end of the world. And that fine, so you're doing 10 over, is going to be a reasonable sum. It's going to be around $100 to $200. It's going to be enough to hurt, but it's not going to break you. Now, you are not going to be pulled over doing 10 over and then be fined $10,000. Why? Because that's excessive. You know, again, if you hit an old lady while you're speeding, that's a different story. But if you're just doing 10 over, $100, $200. The Eighth Amendment forbids excessive fines. It also forbids cruel and unusual punishment. And so speaking of our Assault on the Amendments assignment, what does this mean? Cruel and unusual punishment. Because when this was written, they still hung people. Lynching was still legal when this was written. But now, obviously, cruel and unusual punishment is interpreted a different way. But once more, what does that mean? You know, like Katie brought up, if you're tried for a nonviolent drug conviction, does cruel and unusual punishment mean prison? Should it instead be interpreted as getting that person treatment? Again, that's yet to be determined. The punishment must fit the crime. Proportion. That is the size or amount of something in relation. So the punishment must be in proportion to the crime. You know, there's a difference between premeditated murder in the first degree and accidental death. There's a difference. And so this is yet another controversial question. Is the death penalty cruel or unusual? And that's up to you guys to interpret and decide. Maybe you could do your project on that. Well, let's think about the rest of the amendments here really quick. Rights assures citizens of their rights. For example, the Second Amendment. Did you know this part? That each state has the right to, per the Second Amendment, maintain a well-regulated militia.
Oh.
That's how the Second Amendment works. Now, by militia, how do you interpret that? Is it the State National Guard? Is it law enforcement? Is it... but then also, the right to keep and bear arms. And obviously, the Second Amendment and its interpretation have been a matter of much controversy. Because what does it mean to keep and bear arms? Does that mean bazooka? Does that mean army tank? Does that mean nuclear warhead? Actually, the answer is no to all of those. Does that mean AR-15? That answer is being discussed. You know, does this mean bear arms in a school? You know, that's being discussed, which I personally think is kind of creepy. Does that mean in a church, in a bar? What does this mean? Again, the interpretation of these two simple bullets has been a matter of much controversy. And also, the United States government retains the right to bear an arsenal. And your weapons, again, along with the Second Amendment, are your property and protected rights of privacy and property that we have already discussed. The Third Amendment is a really big one. We take it for granted because we've never had to live in a system where soldiers are being quartered in our homes, but it's a really important one. You see, this was included because it wasn't uncommon for colonists' homes to be confiscated for use by the military. You know, let's say during the French and Indian War, The British Army was being stationed here in the colonies, and they were fighting against the French Army. Well, wars don't stop just because of winter, so the soldiers got to hunker down. And so if the British Army were being stationed near Pennsylvania, and there's not a large enough barracks to house all of the British soldiers, the British Army would require that homes in Pennsylvania or in Philadelphia be offered up to the British Army. And that is now considered a violation of the Third Amendment. The Seventh Amendment. It's all about civil cases. And we'll unpack this later in the course. In a civil case, you're not dealing with a crime that has been committed. You're dealing with an injured party. So this is, for example, Addie loans me her Chromebook, and I throw it as a Frisbee. Boom. Chromebook blows up. I technically haven't committed a crime. I mean, I've damaged her property, but she's going to have to take me to a civil court. And she will be the accuser, the plaintiff. I will be the defendant, and all the details are laid out in the Seventh Amendment that we'll talk about later. But it also talks about the right to a jury trial in a federal case. Ninth Amendment. This is the all other rights are, quote, retained by the people. So if we didn't say it, it doesn't mean you don't have it. So this prevents the claim that only the rights listed in the Bill of Rights are the rights you have. No, you also have the right to be treated like a human, the right to be respected. It's not stated in the Bill of Rights, but it doesn't mean you don't have that right. This is also your unwritten right to privacy is protected in this amendment. Those, quote, all other rights retained by the people, that is your right to privacy. Once more, if you don't want to own a driver's license, you're not required to. It's going to complicate things, but you're not required to. And the 10th Amendment. Just because the Constitution doesn't say it, doesn't mean it can't be done. The powers of the Constitution doesn't give to the national government belong to the states and the people. And ultimately, this prevents Congress and the President from becoming too strong. So it didn't actually add anything. It just says that if we didn't put it in there, it's up to the states. That's what the 10th Amendment is all about. Okay, and so again, right to bear arms, it's complicated. It's a matter of interpretation like all of these amendments.